Welcome back to our series that we're calling WWJD, of what would Jesus do? Last week we talked about how this whole concept of WWJD, what would Jesus do, starts with living and pursuing holiness, right? It's asking the question, hey, what would Jesus do isn't just like, let me make sure I'm being nice, but Jesus, what set him apart was the fact that he lived a sinless life. So to start off the whole idea of what would Jesus do, we have to understand that there is this desire, this approach, this longing for holiness. And so when we look at all of these different areas of our life and we're asking the question, what would Jesus do? It starts off with us denying ourselves. Right? This idea of, hey, we have to stop thinking, what do I want? What do I think is best? What do I think I should do in this situation? And ask the question, what would Jesus do? And honestly, that's why a lot of us come to church, right? A lot of us come to church because it's like, hey, I want to know, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do if he were living in 2024 with everything going on? What would he do? And so today, what I want us to look at is friendships, acquaintances. This is not necessarily including strangers and like people that you run into at the grocery store. I might not even be talking about your neighbors, right? Because if you're like me, you don't know your neighbors. I know them, okay, I've met them before, but like we don't talk on a regular basis. You guys, you don't have to raise your hand and admit that, but I'll tell you, I'll admit that. I'm talking about your friends, your coworkers, your family members, people that you have a relationship with, that you interact with on a daily basis. What would Jesus do in your friendships? And again, I'm not talking about the people who live in your house, right? We're not talking about parents or kids or siblings. We'll get to that a different week. This week, I'm just talking about your friends. And this is an interesting, I know that you guys are probably thinking, hey, it was baby dedication. Why didn't you do parenting? I didn't think about it. Okay, so it was this morning, I was like, why didn't I do parenting? And so I don't know if it was the Lord that was like, that's not what they need to hear, or maybe I just wasn't listening, which is also entirely possible. But I didn't want to just throw something together this morning. I want to give parenting a good amount of time. But it is important. Listen, you ask any parent, you know what parents need? Friends. Right? Parents need friends. We need community. We need community to raise these kids. If you came here this morning to be with somebody who was having a child dedicated, listen, they need you. They need your community. They need your friendship. They need your help. This is something important, not only that we have as parents, but also that we teach our kids. Right? If you have older kids, it's a lot of navigating how they handle friendships, who they're friends with, what they do with those friends, right? And friendship is not just something that we experience because it's just part of life. It's actually part of God's design. Friendship is part of God's design for your life. If you think about even God himself is 3 in 1. God in himself is community. You were created for community. We see it in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. It says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, they can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they'll keep warm. But how can 1 keep warm alone? Though 1 may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. The cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. We see here there's so many benefits to friendship. It's not just like, hey, friends make life more bearable, right? Like that's not all the writer of Ecclesiastes says. He's like, hey, friendships are useful. Friendships, they serve a purpose in your life. There is so much benefit to us having friends, to being friends. And so we know this, right? We all experience the benefits of friends, of having people that we can go to when things are hard. And so today, what I want to look at is not why our friendships are important or what is good about friendships, but the question is, how can we do friendship in a way that is honoring to God? How can we be friends, have friends that is in a way that honors God? And the first thing, the overarching thing, I would really say this is the main point, and the next 2 points are kind of sub-points to this point, is to spiritualize your relationships. Spiritualize your relationships. And then later we'll get into how to specifically do that in these different categories. But I use the scripture a lot. Paul says, hey, make the most of your time because the days are evil. Hey, days are short, days are evil, right? We don't have time to just waste on filler, right? We don't have time to just waste on frivolousness. And I can promise you, if you aren't making the most of your friendships, the enemy is. And one of the most beneficial tactics that the enemy is going to use in your friendships is to just make them a waste of time. Just make it to where it's like, oh yeah, we just kind of get together. Oh, did you watch the game last night? Like, I don't want to talk about it. Or it's like, hey, I've got these traveling plans upcoming. Like, this is one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced, and you know who you are if I'm talking about you. Okay, this is when I was like in high school, and our pastor, I was an intern at a church, and our pastor had just gone to Disney World. So him, the minister of education, which is like he was over Sunday school, the minister of music, they're standing in the hallway of the church. And do you know what they're talking about? Nothing to do with Disney World. Men, if you were to go to Florida on a trip and you come back, every single one of you, for some reason, is going to talk about how you got there. Every single one of you. Oh, did you take 75 down to 94? And then, oh no, we didn't go that way. I heard there was construction that way. And it's like, oh, I went this way. It's like you went to Disney World and you come back talking about how you got there? That seems like a waste, right? I don't know if you guys know this. Disney World, pretty expensive. A drive to Florida, not as expensive as going to Disney World. You could have just driven to Florida and back and come back and talk to all your buddies about how you got there. Saved a lot of money, right? I didn't write that in the message. It was just an interesting story. But it's like, that's what we do. We get back and we just talk about how we got there. Oh, we went to... That's not the point. That's a waste of time. There's so many other things and listen, I look around and all the men, I can see y'all being like, yeah, I do that. I talk about how I got there. Sometimes we waste our friendships. Listen, the enemy does not want you to talk about meaningful things with your friends. He doesn't want them to open up about their struggles. He doesn't want you to share the things that God is doing in your life. Although it may be painful to think about, you probably have friendships that have come and gone in your life that had absolutely no benefit, that were wasted. I know I do. I have friendships that I didn't spiritualize those friendships. So they were just kind of there. And you know what? The enemy loves that. He loves to be like, man, that friendship could have been instrumental in your life, and it wasn't. So that's a win for me. We have these friendships that we just have them come and go, and we never actually have them make an impact. And guys, we are bad at this because we don't like to talk about our feelings. Guys don't like to talk about their feelings. I've read this, I didn't read the study. I heard about somebody who read a study that guys are more likely to open up if they're not making eye contact. That's why some of the best conversations you can have with a man is while you're in a car. Is you're sitting side by side. You laugh, but it's right. I mean, you've been there. You're side by side. I'm not making eye contact with you while we talk about things that are hard to talk about, right? For me, younger generation, maybe it's online on video games, that you've got friends that you've talked for hours with about what's going on in your life, but we're not making eye contact, I can tell you that, right? And for men, I think it's hard for us to open up about our feelings. But just because it's hard doesn't mean we don't do it. Ask people questions about what's going on in their life. Try to find the doors that open up to spiritual conversations. Here's a couple practical ways that you can do that just in your life on a daily basis. How can you just open up a door to make it, hey, here's the way into a spiritual conversation. Most everybody. You're going to go back to work. You're going to go back to school. People are going to be like, hey, how was your weekend? Y'all get that question? Anybody? Who gets that question on a regular basis? How was your weekend, right? People are like, what'd you do? Did you do anything? And the best answer is always, no, I did absolutely nothing. That's the best. But instead of just being like, hey, it was good. Listen, this is a secret. I know. Y'all all came to church today, and it's the weekend. So when they ask, how was your weekend? You could be like, hey, I went to church this weekend. That's a layup. That's what I like to call it. That's a layup. That's easy. There's no defense draped on you. You don't have to force that one. It's right there. That's a layup. Hey, I went to church this weekend. Maybe you can talk about how cute the baby dedication was. The babies they were so cute. It was so great to see them. Maybe you talk about how good the worship was. Maybe it's something that I said that you're like, hey, that was really impactful, that you can take and you can share with somebody else. And what you've done is taken a simple face value question that at its core is not spiritual at all, and you've made it into a door to have a spiritual conversation. Hey, I went to church this weekend. It was really good. It was a really good day. The pastor talked way too long, right? Like, you can say that. You can ask them, hey, do you go to church anywhere? Boom, you have created a spiritual conversation in a friendship that maybe has never had that. Another thing you can do is anytime someone talks about something they're struggling with or something they're going through, you can just simply follow that conversation into, hey, can I pray for you? Can I pray for you right now? You can pray with them right then. That is a really easy way to make something spiritual. Hey, let me pray for you right now. Maybe you say, hey, I don't know how I would get, I know how I would get through that with the support of my church. How are you making it through such a hard thing? You can ask them these questions that lead to spiritual places. Or maybe it's just something as simple as saying, hey, I'm about to go eat lunch and I'm going to say a blessing. I just want to know if there's anything I can pray for you for. Again, you're opening these doors to letting them know, hey, this friendship, I don't want it to just be about weather and sports. I want to know about what's going on with you. I want you to know that there's more to me than just simple conversation. We often try to just skirt around the idea of sharing the gospel. And maybe you say, hey, I just want to be a good friend and a good example of a Christian. Listen, you should do that, okay? I'm not saying to stop doing that. Be a good friend. People need friends. Be a good friend. Be a good example of what it is to live like Jesus. But that's just one side. There's no spiritual benefit to that. And if we're honest, we say that that's what we do because it's easy. It's easy to just be like, oh, I just want to be a good friend and like a Christian example. There's no effort there. Be loving, be a good friend, and be a spiritual friend. Because listen, y'all, Christianity is not a lifestyle. It's not a morality. It is in itself spiritual, right? Yes? No? Where are we at? We together on this one? Christianity is spiritual. Listen, you came in here today and we sang songs to somebody that we cannot see. Right? Nothing practical about that. Nothing like that's like normal about that. We're singing songs to a person that we can't see. In and of itself, spiritual. We come to Jesus with the idea of, hey, forgive me of my sins so I can spend eternity with you in heaven. That's a spiritual thing, right? We say, hey, let me read this book that is thousands of years old and operate that it is the absolute and ultimate truth. That's not something normal people do that's not spiritual, right? There is a spirituality in everything that we do as believers, but for some reason, we want to have these friendships and say, hey, you know what? I just want to be a good friend. We don't spiritualize the relationship. Listen, y'all, following Jesus is spiritual. Following Jesus is spiritual. And we know this. When we need something, we get real spiritual, don't we? We get real spiritual when we need something. That's when it's like, oh, it's time for me to get spiritual. I need to pray and ask God for supernatural things. I need his peace that surpasses understanding. God, give me supernatural wisdom, right? All of those things are spiritual. So why wouldn't your friendships be spiritual? Pray for your friends. Pray for your coworkers. Take the relationships that you already have and breathe spiritual life into them. And this ends up being in two separate categories, because the friendships and the spiritual friendships we have with people who do not believe in Jesus end up looking different than the friendships we have with people who do follow Jesus. So I want to look at the first one, is how do we interact with people who don't follow Jesus? And I think the way that we can look at that is we can categorize them as, are we being influential or influenced? Are you being influential or are you being influenced? And I'm not the kind of person who's going to stand up here and say, hey, you shouldn't even be friends with non-believers. You shouldn't associate with people who don't follow Jesus. You're never going to hear me say that. I think that's very counter-gospel. I often question how monks, it's like you just are by yourself all day and you never interact with people who don't follow Jesus. Then I did find out that they do a lot of like mission work too. But for the most part, it's just a lot of non-secular friendships. It's like, well, how are you sharing the gospel? How are you going and making disciples of all nations if you're just keeping to Christian community without any interaction with non-believers? But we have to understand that those people who we do interact with, who do not follow Jesus, that they're not going to be on the same path as you. And when I say that, I'm including the people who say, oh, I'm a Christian, and then you watch their life and you go, I don't think you are, right? I know that I have people in my life that I'm not super close with, extended family that I don't see as much as I used to, that it's like, hey, they know and they say they're Christians, but you can see from the way they live their life that it's like, I'm not sure that that's true. So be able to discern who in your life is a believer, who isn't. That I have those people, and then I have people in my life that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt follow God, who I know that they live to honor God, that I can seek wise counsel from them. Listen, we have to understand who in your life is a believer and who is not, and approach those relationships differently. Because in every relationship, you can be influential or you can be influenced. In your relationships with non-believers, don't allow yourself to be influenced by that. Understand that they are lost. They're not following you on the journey of what would Jesus do. They don't ask the question, what would Jesus do? That's not the way that they're trying to live their life. So when we are trying to say, hey, who is influential in my life? We want it to be people who ask that question, right? Who want to live like Jesus. And here's how we know that. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18. It says, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. A few paragraphs later in chapter 2 of 1 Corinthians, it says, the person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness, and cannot understand them because they are discerned only through the Spirit. Listen, the people who are not believers, who you interact with on a regular basis, they're not on the same path as you. These are the people who are going to champion things like, hey, you should get even. If that person hurts you, then you get even. Or maybe they're people that it's like, hey, you can just spend your money however you want, put it on credit, do whatever because you know that you deserve it. You deserve it. You should do that. Or maybe it's just people who choose morality based on do whatever makes you happy instead of seeking to live in a way that honors God. When it comes to those people, we have to be diligent, that we are focusing our hearts on shining a light instead of dimming it. That we don't just get around them and say, hey, I'm going to put my spirituality on a shelf while I'm interacting with this person because they don't believe this, so I'm just going to pretend like it doesn't exist for a little while. Right? Who are these people that we have to be intentional and say, hey, I want to be influential in their life. I want to be the spiritual influencer in their life. Think about missionaries when they go out on the mission field. Their intent isn't just like, hey, you know what? I want to go to a new country and I just want to live like Jesus and see what happens. They don't just go, you know what, I'm just kind of lonely. I want to make friends just so I'm comfortable here. You know, I get a little lonely. I want to be comfortable while I'm doing mission work. Every single person they meet, their intention is, how can I shine the light of Jesus to this person? How can I make sure that this person, this friend of mine, this person I'm becoming friends with, knows who Jesus is? People who are on the mission field it can be very lonely. They don't go trying to find friends for their own comfort so that when they go to work, they have somebody who's a friend and makes the day go a little quicker. It's so that they can share the gospel. It's so that they can be influential. Do you have people in your life who are influential? Who in your life, think about who the people are in your life who are influential and ask, should they be, right? Is this person a good influence? And I'm not saying if they're not to stop being friends. What I'm saying is you be the influence. And don't make what they think and their thoughts impact and change who you are, but you let who you are change them. And think about those who are influential in your life. Who are the people, your friends, your family, your acquaintances, your coworkers, that you do want to influence? Or that you do want them to influence you, I should say. Who is it that you see as people of wisdom, or they do something really well that you want to learn from? I have pastor friends who I've met through Sarepta. I have Lex, who is the head of Sarepta. I have my dad. He's one of the first people I go to ask questions. Find the people in your life who are people that you want, hey, that's the person that I want to have influence on my life. Figure out who those people are and set the relationships up to where you are being influenced by those people. Who are these people that you want to have influence and you want to be influenced? And honestly, maybe you go ask them. Maybe you say, hey, listen, I've seen how you integrate, how you live, and how you believe in Jesus and work in the secular world in a way that is incredibly honoring to God. Can I take you to lunch? Can we go get coffee? Find those people that you want to be influential and ask them to be influential in your life. Your friends who are believers, spiritualize those friendships, those relationships, because it can bring so much added benefit. Again, the enemy would love nothing more than for your relationships with other Christians to just be surface level and not have any depth. Because the enemy knows that the power of Christian community. It says so in Scripture. The Bible teaches us in Proverbs 27, as iron sharpens iron, so does one person sharpen another. Iron sharpens iron. There is so much power in godly friendships where we weave our lives together and the frivolous and the serious, right? Find people that you can just enjoy talking about sports or enjoy going hunting or fishing or playing video games with and talking about the things that are spiritual. It's important too, because if you have those, do you have people in your life where things, it's just like every time they call, it's going to be a 45-minute conversation about how bad everything is, right? It's like only serious things. Those friendships don't feel helpful, right? It just feels burdensome. Find the ones who it's like, hey, I enjoy doing things that are unimportant with that person and that are meaningful. Those are going to be the relationships that bring you so much life. That say, hey, I can do nothing with this person and it's great. I can have meaningful conversation with this person and it's great. Hebrews chapter 10 tells us, let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. We used this verse a few weeks ago when we're talking about community and in terms of our church mission, right? We've been tasked to push each other towards good works and to encourage one another. And even this is two-sided. We have to make sure that we are being encouraging, right? We have to be the ones who are saying, hey, you're doing great. Hey, I'm going to be here for you when things are hard. I'm going to lift you up. Sometimes that's the easy part. Then there's things that we don't want to do or we don't do as often as we should. And maybe it's like, hey, I'm not good at being vulnerable. Maybe I'm not good at opening up about the things that I need. Maybe I'm not good at letting people in. There's this part of Christian community that I think that we can do much better in, and that's the accountability aspect. The accountability aspect, which means, hey, I'm going to be honest about the sins that I'm struggling with. I need somebody who can help me. I need somebody who can speak truth into my life, because this idea of to be sharpened means to cut or chip away part of the iron that isn't beneficial. For something to be sharpened, you get rid of the stuff that doesn't make you better, that isn't useful. So are we doing that in our friendships? Are we letting our friends into the dark areas of our life that need to be chipped away, that need to be cut away? Proverbs 27, verse 6. This is a beautiful verse. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. When there's a wound from a friend, that's something that can be trusted. That they didn't just do it because they wanted to hurt you. You know that person well enough to know their intention wasn't just to make me feel bad about myself. That they are speaking something true for your benefit. And that's far better than compliments from somebody who you can't trust, right? If somebody who you know, you're like, I don't really like the things they do. If they start telling you, hey, you're doing a great job, you're like, ooh, maybe I need to examine that again. Because if that person's telling me I'm doing good, that's not the compliment I want, right? But when our friends are saying, hey, you've got something in your nose, right? When you have those friends, or do you have those friends that you get home and you're like, why didn't nobody tell me? Like nobody told me that I've had something in my teeth all day and nobody ever told me. And then you find out my friends aren't actually even my friends, right? But the friends who aren't afraid to say, hey, you've got something in your teeth. Who aren't afraid to say, hey, you've got something going on and you need to go fix it, right? Those friends, the wounds from them, you can trust it, right? You also know they're not messing with you, right? They're not just trying to get you out of the room. You know that they're saying it, they're doing this for your benefit. And what we have to realize is that every relationship is kind of like a bank account. And I don't mean that it's transactional, but what I mean is there has to be equity in it for you to make that kind of withdrawal, right? Like I can't just walk up to somebody and be like, hey, I'm going to do this again, okay? Like I do sometimes. I'm not going to just walk up to somebody and be like, hey, you put on some weight. You know, you need to, are you honoring God with your health, right? That would be really rude, right? But if it's a person that you have a really good relationship with, you've poured into each other, you're good friends, you can be like, hey man, are you okay? Are you all right? Are you eating your feelings a little bit, right? We have those people that it's like, hey, I've put the equity in and that person knows that if I say something, that it can be trusted. That I'm not just coming to try to hurt somebody's feelings. We have to be, if we want people to be vulnerable with us, and if we want to be vulnerable with people, we have to have that trust built up, right? We have to have that trust built up. You're not going to let them in and be vulnerable and talk about issues of lust or financial struggles unless it's someone that you've already established trust with. If we want to have these relationships that are beneficial, that shape us into being useful tools for the Lord, iron that is sharpened, right? We have to make a priority. We have to put in work. When you look at how Jesus lived, there wasn't a step that he took that wasn't intentional. Everything he did was intentional. He didn't do things on accident. He didn't stumble across the blind man who needed sight. He didn't stumble across the man who needed to be healed. He doesn't stumble across these people. There is intentionality. So we take that intentionality of what would Jesus do and we put it into every area of our lives, especially our friendships. Right? Most of our friends, I would venture to guess, are people that you met and you just clicked with. You know what I'm talking about. That when you say, hey, how did y'all become friends? You're like, I don't know, we met. And we've been friends. That's just how it works. But put some intentionality into that. It's great. You should have people that you just naturally click with. But that shouldn't be all that the relationship is. Be intentional to put into those friendships, those relationships. Your friendships, they don't grow on accident. They don't get deeper on accident. They don't get spiritual on accident. When we know who in our lives should have influence and who we should be influencing, adding this spiritual element, making friendships with each other that are better, none of that happens on accident. All of it takes work, but it is worth it. While Jesus is here on earth, he had this group of 12 incredibly close friends that he poured into, he was vulnerable with. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when he is stressing about going to the cross, he's vulnerable with the disciples. And what does he say? He says, hey, don't fall asleep. Pray for me. I'm going to go pray. Please, just stay awake. Could they do it though? No, they all fell asleep. The disciples, they were intentional about letting Jesus be in the intimate, vulnerable parts of their lives. They let him teach them. They let him call things out about them, and they received it. And then even inside these 12, he had 3 close friends, Peter, James, and John. Scripture's pretty clear that it was like, hey, this group of 12, those are his really good friends. Then he had his best friends, Peter, James, and John. There was intentionality with those relationships. It wasn't just like, this is our side text, and we have this group of 3 that we do that with. Like, there was intentionality with these friendships. What Jesus didn't do is waste the time that he had with the disciples. He didn't waste the friendships that he had. He understood how valuable and meaningful every minute was. Now, I'm sure that they laughed and they probably had fun together. I don't think it was all just serious things. But they were also vulnerable. It wasn't fun for the sake of fun. It was intentionality built into these friendships. So when we look at our friendships, when we look at our acquaintances, when we look at maybe it's our family members, maybe it's our cousins that we're good friends with, or our distant relatives, our aunts and our uncles that we've got these good relationships with, who are the people in your life who you need to be more influential? Think about the people. This is a series. It's going to take a lot of self-reflection. Think about the people in your life where you're like, I need to be more intentional about how I pour into that person. And then think about the people in your life who you need that it's maybe, hey, our relationship isn't spiritual at all. There is no spirituality in this relationship, and I want to be the example of Jesus to that person. Or maybe you're both believers, and it's like, hey, we've been wasting our time just talking about football and how we drove to Disney World, and we haven't talked about anything meaningful. And I'm going through a lot. Or I know they're going through a lot, and we never talk about it. Spiritualize those relationships. Open the doors of spirituality to that friendship. Think about how you can do that, how you can say, hey, I'm going to make this relationship not just a earthly temporary friendship, but a spiritual friendship where we are iron and sharpening iron, or where I am influencing that person to draw them closer to Jesus. It's going to take effort, right? It's going to take intentionality. And I don't even just mean in the work itself, but figuring out who those people are. Sorting those relationships in your head of being like, hey, I have to make sure that every time I'm in a large group and this person is present, I want them to know that I follow Jesus. I want this person to know what it looks like to follow Jesus. I want this person to hear the way a person who follows Jesus talks. I want this person to hear that it's not just a practical set of moral values, but there is a spiritual aspect that I believe that the creator of the universe, who is eternal, who is before and after, who is holy, who is set apart, that I sinned, I offended him, and I can't do anything to fix it. He sent his son down to earth, died, took my sins on himself, was raised 3 days later. Now he has given me new life, and his Holy Spirit dwells inside of me. Is any of that a moral, practical set of rules? Somebody said no. Thanks for the answer. It's not. It's all spiritual. So when we ask the question, what would Jesus do in your friendships? He would make them spiritual. And I'll preface it this. I don't mean weird. You don't have to be weird. Spiritual doesn't always mean weird. Because we wouldn't say the things we do here on Sunday morning are weird. It's part of our life. It's part of our identity and who we are. We see the eternal benefit. So, spiritualize your friendships. Be an influence to those who don't know Jesus, and allow yourself to be sharpened by people who do follow Jesus. Amen? Let's pray together.